Howdy, howdy, y'all. It is Thursday, which means it's time for semantics. Not usually a Thursday streamer, but I'm Ben Myers, and today I am joined by the one and only Carie Fisher. Carie, how's it going?
Good. I don't know if I'm the one and only. I am the one and only maybe in accessibility.
You are the
But
only
yes.
Carie Fisher I've ever heard of.
Oh yeah, there's no other ones that are out
None.
there.
Um,
None.
so for folks who haven't seen you around, do you want to introduce yourself? Kind of tell folks who you are.
Sure. So yeah, I'm not a Wookiee. I'm not also a princess. Something in between. My name is Carie Fisher. I've got, I don't know, it's a short blonde hair ish. I need some highlights done. Pale skin because it's that time of the year, and I'm in my office with my coworker Phil, the philodendron, and I've got blue and tan walls. So that's a little bit about what I look like. And so what I do is, Ben's gonna love this. I am a recovering front end developer because I did that for 15 years or so, and I transitioned over to accessibility because I started realizing how much crap. Can I say that word on
Yeah, go
here?
go for it.
Okay.
Go for it.
How much crap I made as a developer. And when I started realizing the mistakes that I was making for the end user, especially in particular, like screen reader users, right? But even color contrast before I knew better. So I started realizing, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. Like, I want to be my legacy, my code legacy, I want it to be, inclusive and robust and time standing the test of time. So that's kind of like why I transitioned into accessibility. So I've kind of been doing that for a while.
That's
That's the
awesome.
short and long.
Yeah. That's awesome. I've definitely seen you around. In particular, it seems you've kind of made a name for yourself when it comes to SVG accessibility.
I guess, yeah, I started it just as a passion, and I figured I was the only person in the world who cared about SVGs, and I found out there's this huge like fan base of SVGs. So
There are dozens of
I
us.
I
Dozens.
know dozens, at least one of them. Yeah, so maybe I'm like, yeah, I do other things also, but it's just kind of fun. I
Yeah.
like it because it's a mix of like science and art, right? Because who
Okay.
doesn't love, a good visual?
Absolutely. Yeah, let me go ahead and start sharing my screen and we can take a look. I've put Carrie's Twitter in the chat. Go follow Carrie. Also, take a look at Carrie's site. It is a lovely site. I don't know, I'm just a big fan of bright colors and large graphics. Um and so this is a lovely site that you absolutely should take a poke around.
Well, and the good thing then it's also accessible and using lots of SVGs and both it's utilizing two of the things that we're going to do today or that I'm hoping you are going to do today, which is doing the
Yeah.
light dark mode and then
Okay.
prefers reduced animation. So you'll see both of those.
Excellent. Yeah, let's dive into that. And I know you have previously written about this for Smashing, so I'm going to share that link in the chat as well. Is there anything you want to say about this before we dive into the code?
Um, yeah, I mean, well, definitely post the code pin that I sent you because I made some updates since this
Yes.
one came out earlier in the year, and we're going to be utilizing this one today too as a reference. So the whole point of this, and I did this first for DQ back in 2019. I dusted it off in 2021, added a lot more patterns and a lot more testing parameters. So I was testing primarily screen readers but different types in different browsers, and even in combinations that aren't technically recommended. But
Hmm.
do we all follow the rules? I mean, I use VoiceOver in Chrome all the time. So as long as you're aware of those nuances and knowing that it's supposed to be paired with something else, like in this case, Safari, I think that why not? I added it to the matrix. It's probably redundant and not necessary. But if you scroll all the way back to the bottom, you'll see what I'm talking about. And it really is like a useful
Ooh.
mini database for you about SVGs and how it works best in these different combinations of browsers and screen readers. Unfortunately, yes, it's a big long table. Thankfully, CodePen has these full bar. But I think it gets to the point where really quickly, like which patterns are going to be most accessible for your environment and user needs. It's a
That
lot of information.
Oh, but that's awesome. Like, yeah, I live for people who make resources like this. Like, oh God, what is the site I'm thinking of? It's allysupport.io.
Oh, Michael Fairchild. Yeah, he made that.
Yes,
He
this.
worked he works at DQ as well. That's why I know. And I do utilize that. He actually doesn't have a lot of information on SVGs. I feel like he could use some of my data
There we go.
for accessibility support. Just saying that, Michael, if you're listening, but hint, hint.
Maybe we just need to get Michael on and just kind of go through this site and
Yeah,
provide
and call
updates.
him
That would be
out.
fun. Yeah, come on, Michael. Where are those SVGs? This is a welcoming community. However, those SVGs, man, you're kind of letting us all down.
Yeah, the dozens of us, right?
Dozens. Excellent, excellent. Uh,
It's a good site too. Yeah, it's the same kind of basic concept. I kind of did some different testing beyond what he does, and he also does a lot with like dragging naturally speaking, because again, we have to know that assistive tech goes obviously beyond just screen reader users. So,
yeah,
yeah.
that reminds me. At some point, I just need to play around with naturally speaking because I have not experienced like any voice control like that, and that is a serious gap in my own accessibility training.
I tried it a few times on some documents, and it was like not pretty.
Oh
But
boy.
yeah, I need to practice more as well. You should definitely get somebody on to do that. That would be
Yeah.
a pretty awesome talk too.
Yeah, I think that totally would. And chat, let me know if you want to see that as well. I think that would be good. Yeah, so you have experimented with a bunch of different ways to do SVGs and a bunch of different assistive technologies. And you've kind of figured out some of these patterns and the experiences that we want to create. And so we're taking this to an SVG of my own making, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're going to be an SVG wizard by the end of this hour.
That's exciting.
Money back guaranteed. No, actually, no.
So
Yeah.
this here is the logo that I'm using on my own site. I kind of picked the A because I had it at the ready and I knew I owned it. But B, I figured it might be easy to do some accessibility things with this, and then harder to do like because it is a fairly simple graphic, but then
Mhm.
harder to do other things like maybe even describing what's going on here. So this is kind of what we've got. Where should we start?
Yeah, so let's start from the beginning. And I'm doing something similar tonight for NYC Alley, if anyone wants to check that out, where I'm actually going through the demo. So we're flipping the script, so to speak, and Ben is doing this. So I'm letting him have the control. So let's hope that we get to the end and it's good.
Oh
So
boy.
no pressure, no pressure. Okay, so the first thing when we're doing SVGs and that we're going to modify, then you brought up a couple of really good points. You need to own this, or at least it's something in the public domain that doesn't have any like restrictions, right? If you're using it in a sense of, outside of a code pin or something, right? If you're just using it for a demo, I'm sure that it's fine. But so he has the SVG that he had created, and then he has it, the body. I popped it into the code pen. If you're using a program like Adobe Illustrator or some other, I think you used a different one than Illustrator.
I
What did you
used
use?
Inkscape was mine.
Inkscape. Okay. And it doesn't really matter what program, but a lot of them have options to export them as an SVG. It's not like you can take an image and convert it to an SVG and then it's like magically, you can control everything. So there's definitely some, you need to make sure that it's actually being drawn and not that you're just changing the format. So anyway, you keep a look at that, and you can export it from a program like that, and you can see the code. You copy it and you paste it. So check. That was like step one. So yay.
I'm already feeling so accomplished.
Exactly. All right. So that was the good news. That was the easy part. So the problem is that most SVG files out of the box aren't super accessible. Sometimes you'll get like a title tag. Oh, taking one step back is that SVGs are different in the sense of images. And we talked, I think, Ben, a little bit about that beforehand. SVGs don't have a true alt attribute available. So it's not like you can just throw an alt. into the mix, into the tag, and then all of a sudden you've got, you know, an alt like you would for an image. With SVGs, we have some other different options, right? We can
Mm-hmm.
use ARIA, of course. There's a lot of different ARIA options, but we also have special tags that are only for SVGs. So things like title.
Okay.
So imagine title. And then there's one that's called DESC, so description. It's very similar to the concept of like a long description. And
Got it.
so there's all kinds of different combinations that you could choose, right? So depending on, going back to that matrix, right? So depending on what AT and what browsers you want to be supporting and how much information you're trying to convey within the SVG, you're going to have different options, right? Also, if you're using the image tag and you're just linking out to an SVG, that's essentially the same as an image. So that, throwing that one out of the mix. So the first four are related to that. The next ones are probably more of what you want.
Okay. Got it. So there's several ways it looks like you can apply a role. Do you have to apply the role? It looks like all of these are applying the role.
You do. The long and short of it is that, so SVG is scale vector graphics, and so essentially it's code, as we see right in the code bin. So an AT device like a screen reader doesn't necessarily identify an SVG as an image, right? So
Oh.
you have to give it a role of image. So that's an ARIA role equals IMG. So it's basically saying, hey, screen reader, or hey, AT, this is I'm utilizing this as a visual, right? The converse is true. Let's say you have an SVG that's just decorative. You can take off that role of IMG and theoretically the AT will skip over it. I usually add a little bit more like a ARIA hidden or somehow ARIA role equals presentation to signify, you know, jump over it. This isn't an image or it's repetitive or decorative, right?
Okay.
But some people I know just don't add the IMG and they seem to be fine. So definitely test, test. So yeah.
Gotcha. So if I wanted to add in this description, I guess I'm gonna look at the different patterns. My cat is walking around under the table. He is excited. It is his time to join. Okay, so probably seems like maybe I would want to pick one of patterns 9 through 12, maybe, or even
If you,
5 through 8.
yeah, I think 5 through 8, only because for a logo, you don't need to really convey a lot of information. So if it was like maybe it's highly animated, or if it's like a graphic with like an infographic or anything that's dynamic or something like that, I
Mm-hmm.
would think about extended, something complex. So for simple, I kind of go in that range.
Okay.
And actually you can add 13 into that mix because 13 is very similar. 13 was an added bonus because people kept asking me, well, let's just talk about, you know, ARIA label. What about ARIA label? So I threw
Okay.
in some ARIA label. The problem with ARIA label is that it's pretty powerful and it's going to override a lot of things, which we see in 14 and 15. But for 13, it works just as intended. So
Gotcha.
definitely take a look at that.
So it looked to me like pattern 5 seemed like universally supported, from what I can tell. Totally
Yep,
green column. So
total green.
let's maybe go with that approach. So
Yeah.
give it a role equals image and then a title element. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll.
So your role will go in the SVG tag itself,
Okay.
an IMG. Yep. And then the title is its own thing. And so it would come after or like before the drawing. I mean, it could be really anywhere inside as long as it's within that SVG tag, but outside of that initial information.
So here seems like it would work. And then, okay, how would you title this? Because I've heard of different approaches, right? Like some people might have something like logo, and then some people would fully describe like this is a geometric, like 90s Memphis style, red and yellow shape that vaguely resembles the initials BM.
I like the latter, maybe a
Okay.
little too verbose, but this is, I think that writing image alternatives are, it's like part art, part science for sure, because what you want to convey at least is the essential information. And then it's up to you to decide in some ways like what is essential. There's certain things like logos that are actually exempt from certain criteria. And also, if it's located in the top left-hand corner of your website,
Hmm.
people know it's a logo. Probably, you don't
Yeah.
necessarily have to say logo of, but you can. Like some of those rules are kind of just more best practice.
So
Yeah.
here's it used in context, and so in this case, I could just say something like logo, or maybe even hide it altogether.
Yeah, I mean, in this purpose, let's not hide it just because then we
Hmm.
would have less to do. It show's over, all right, if you hide it. But
The secret
yeah,
to SVGs is just make sure no one can access them.
there you go. That
That's
sounds
what I
like
learned
you.
from Carie Fisher today.
No, don't say that. I'm gonna get in trouble. They're gonna fire me.
Oh no. Okay, so we could
Yeah.
do something like say logo. I think in this case, maybe I'll go with this description here, which is I've added a title element that says geometric red and yellow glyph that resembles the letters BM. Does that seem
Yeah,
appropriate?
that sounds a good in between. Yeah. And again, logo of not required. Yeah.
Okay, very cool.
Based on the position. If you decide you're going to use it someplace else or any other context, then you definitely want to maybe add that into the mix, especially like if you see it later on, like in the body or somehow in the content or someplace
Mm,
outside of where you would normally find the logo.
okay, very cool.
Yeah.
I bet I can pop
All
this
right.
out into maybe its own window and then play around with voiceover a bit. See that announcement. Though I am not familiar enough with CodePen. How do I pop? Oh
Oh,
no.
this is a pro tip. Go up to the top right, kind of up there. I'm like using my mouse, but you can't see my mouse. So
Oh
go
yeah.
over two notches from where you are. It looks like a little window guide. Yeah.
Okay.
Do debug mode because what
Debug
that
mode.
does is it takes it out of the iframe.
Ooh. Okay.
It's much easier to test if you're doing testing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and turn on voiceover. For those who are unfamiliar, I'm going to use the command and then click my Touch ID button 3 times to turn on the Mac OS native screen reader voiceover.
VoiceOver on Chrome, CodePen, entering toolbar, selection,
Oop,
https://CodePen, SVG CodePen,
I
SVG
always
accessibility for
hang on.
reading CodePen, SVG access.
I think it gets weird when there's like nothing else on the page, but I'll open up the rotor and I think that should show me.
Window spots, no items, articles menu. Window spots menu, no items in
Okay.
closing, web spots menu, toolbar item palette.
Is there a good way to
Let me
hit
see.
directly the I do see it has the tooltip, which is very cool.
Yeah, I'm looking at your code too. I refreshed it. It looks good. Do you want me to? Oh, I'm trying to think.
Oh,
You want me to try it on my side? I'll just see real quick if there's something.
yeah, and I'll open up the accessibility inspector and just demonstrate that the
Yeah.
name is there.
VoiceOver off.
Um, we'll do that. Always fun figuring out the best way to
Like
demo.
demos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Give me a
So
second. Mine's sticky too.
here's my
Yeah, and it's
SVG.
not a focusable element, so sometimes it's harder. You have to jump into, like I said, the
Hmm.
iframe has its own issue, and then you jump into it. But it should
Hmm.
be detecting it both as an image and it should have that title.
Yeah, I'm seeing
Okay.
roll image. It's got the name, which is the geometric red and yellow, etc. So it should have that. Even if in the moment I couldn't immediately hit it with the screen reader. I don't know. CodePen demos
Okay.
are weird in that regard sometimes.
So I think what it is, it might be your voiceover doesn't have images maybe in the menu because I
Oh,
I popped up voiceover and I'm seeing geometric, comma, red and yellow glyph that resembles dot dot dot.
okay.
So I can see it in the rotor. I can show you my screen if you want. Otherwise, I can tell you how to add it if you want it to the rotor.
Uh, let's. I think let's maybe just kind of proceed as we've got it. Like keep adding more stuff to the SVG because
Yeah,
we're already somehow 20 minutes in already. So let's I think
crazy.
move on
Yeah.
to the next thing. So we've added a title, and this is effectively named our SVG. It's the SVG equivalent of alt text, it would seem. Um,
Hmm.
plus, it gives us hover text.
Yeah. So by default, the rotor won't include images unless you check it. So if anyone's watching at home and they want to do that, just go into your rotor settings under voiceover, under accessibility, but backwards. All right, so let's assume that's good because it is good. I tested on my
Mhm.
machine, and we'll just assume we got it. So check.
Okay.
The other thing is that, so okay, that was step 2. And that's pretty much all you need to do for that one, right? Is that you just need to decide, who your users are, what you're supporting for AT, what browsers you're supporting, what kind of, if you're doing native or mobile apps versus web and all that kind of good stuff. So take a look at the matrix, figure it out. The other thing that I do, so step 3 is kind of cleaning stuff up, right?
Okay.
So right now, typically, and I'll have to look at your SVGs, but typically SVGs have the styles embedded inside them. So usually you'll see words like fill, or you'll see a stroke, you'll see different design elements, and then you'll see, a hex code, right? Maybe a
Yeah.
gradient or something. So what I do is if I want to be able to modify them, or the ones I want to modify, I should say, I would take that out. So I strip out all the things that are embedded in that HTML, like style wise, and
Okay.
I put them into my CSS. And that way I can have more control over what I want to do with it.
Got it.
So I'm gonna look at yours real quick. Yeah,
So
so style. So don't delete them, especially if you want to keep that same style, but maybe just pop it over to the CSS as a note.
should
Okay,
I
because we're gonna do the same thing.
should I go ahead and start using the IDs for this, or
Yeah, and if
okay?
you want, if you're doing something, yeah, you already have a transform on that, which is fine. You can just leave it at that. But if you want to name it something different, like the ID, if you want it to be like the B or the M, something that's a little bit more user friendly, so instead of like G1183-B,
Yeah.
this would be the time to do it too.
What's a
And that
good
really helps. Yeah.
What's a good way to tell what I am actually messing with right now? Change the color maybe?
I inspect it. Yeah, you could color change it. That's a really good idea. But I'm kind of like I said, recovering front end dev. So I always seem to just inspect it and then see what it is. And sometimes, like in inspect, you can just hide or delete something. You're like, oh, okay, that's what it is. Great. Yeah. So now it looks like you've got that's your
Yeah.
shadow.
Specifically, it's left shadow. Okay, cool. So
Mhm.
I'm gonna, I guess, kind of do this in the background, and if there's more things you want to talk about in the
Sure.
meantime, we can let you keep talking about that, and I'll be working on this.
See, I told you you're gonna have to do the work. All right, so what I normally do, like what Ben is showing here in this demo, is that I take out anything that I'm going to be modifying. So again, for modification purposes, it might be image, it might be animation, it might be that it's rotating, right? I guess that's kind of an animation, but just think about what your end product is gonna be, and then, make those IDs maybe a little bit easier to understand and take out any styles. So again, mostly I'm thinking most of the things that you might have some transforms and other things, but I normally think about like fills and strokes or stroke color, stroke outline. Uh, SVGs have a lot of different things that you can do with them. So it depends on how simple it is, the item that you start with. So I take all that and I put it into the CSS because the next thing that we're going to do, essentially, like we're duplicating the styles in the CSS. That's pretty straightforward. It should be pretty easy, like, right, the ID, and then you have the style that you apply. Again, it's not like typical text or background that you would use. Like you can't necessarily use like background on SVG. You might do something like fill. So FILL, unlike Phil, my coworker, but also like fill opacity. That's a big one. Fill roll, stroke. I'm trying to think of some other ones that we do. There's tons. I'm sure there's good references on that as well. But yeah, so I do that. But what we're doing is we're working towards being able to flip the design. So all about being inclusive, we have to think that some people are going to be using this in dark mode. Some people are going to be
Okay,
experiencing this SVG in light mode, right? And so we want to make sure that both experiences are accessible.
that makes
The
sense
only
to
other
me.
thing that you're going to want then is probably a color for your body so you can switch for dark mode.
Yeah,
So
let's do it.
so maybe add a div. Actually, if you just put body in CodePen, that's enough. You don't have to do an extra div, but in real life, the SVG just wouldn't be hanging out on its own. Although that's kind of an interesting idea that you could have a whole website or app just in SVG form. I mean, that might be a little bit too much, but you probably still need some other things in there. It's good to dream though.
Well timed.
All right, so you want to start your body off probably light. Let's call this light mode because our shadow is dark.
Okay, cool. So start with maybe
There
a
you go.
color like white smoke or something like that. Give us
Yeah.
some interesting color. It's slightly darker.
I'm so much like you. I like to use the names when I can because it's just kind of old school.
Yeah. I
All
don't.
right, so
CSS name colors are just nice colors too. It's a good palette to work from.
it's fun. I actually did that on, oh, I did that on the Fox matrix. If you look in there, there's all kinds of interesting colors. Some are, I will say, probably not super PC because they were made in like the 90s or something, but like moccasin, I'm thinking maybe that's not a very good term these days, but there might be equivalents out there that you could use. Yeah. So I'm going to pop in chat for us, just for us, Ben, what you're going to put in next. So
Sounds good. Ooh, it's a
So
media
once we,
query.
yeah. So the really cool stuff. Oh, and I put it at the very end. I think
Oh, I see.
that's better. Sorry.
No, not a problem. Not a problem. Let's do it.
All right. So just like the media queries that we know and love for, like breakpoints and detecting screen or print or, all the things that you can do with media queries these days. This is the prefers color scheme, which, as you might understand, that these are, we've done a light equivalent. Now we're going to do a dark equivalent.
Okay.
So the only two real things that I would change in yours, Ben, are the body and the shadow, because the shadow won't pop up if you're a dark background. And if you started with a dark theme and you went, you can go opposite. You can go to the light. So you would just do at media prefers color scheme light. There used to be one called no preference that people used a lot, but it's not very well supported and
Okay.
people don't use it as often. So definitely just light or dark.
All right.
Or default, I guess.
So I'll set like a background color to be, very dark gray. And then the shadow. What might be a good way to do the shadow here? Wonder what color that would be. And so this would be fill, is my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And we could
do. And if fill was what we used before in the code, I should look at your code again. But there you go. Yeah, that's a pretty interesting one.
Yeah, I don't know. New color palette coming. We've introduced blue.
Teal.
It's very 90s. Look how 90s that is.
I like the 90s. I can't complain.
Let's do it. We're going 90s here.
All right. So and Ben, you must have dark mode on because
I
this
do.
is what the default is. So what happens when you switch back to light mode?
Yeah. So let me go turn on appearance. Oh, nope, not that. Okay. System preferences. It opened over here, and I have to slide this over. And then is it in? It wouldn't be in accessibility.
General.
It's in general. No, thank you.
It's in general, yeah.
And then I'll set it to be light. And then come back over here, and we've got our white smoke.
Magic.
Magic.
So it is pretty magical, and it changes just that quickly. So if I went to your site and you had a dark mode and a light mode, then I could experience either or, right?
Yeah.
So I think that the one side kind of note real quick, and I don't think because you're a logo, it's exempt from the non-text contrast for images. So in the sense, because the word essential, right? So the word essential. So if this was essential to understanding, like if you went back on my Carie website, I have icons on the side that are my menu icons, and they don't have any other words next to them. So they are essential. That means that I need to meet that 3.1 3 to 1 ratio for color contrast. So what I'm looking at is, in my case, the outline, which is the black, against the white background. So that's what I need to meet for color contrast purposes. And then obviously the reverse is true when you see this one in dark mode. the outline, I believe, is like a lighter white color, and it has to, pop from that, or the color is when you highlight it.
It's
So in
especially
this case,
evident
I'm
in
looking at,
it's especially evident in the microphone where you've turned it to a gray.
yeah, and so you can do lots of different tools, and I don't think this is showing up super well on here for the contrast, but it definitely needs the color contrast ratios. But as I'm seeing it right now, I'm like, I can't see that. But it does fast, so check it out. All right, so that's good. I mean, magic. You already did a little bit of magic. Let's extend that though, right? So let's kind of
Yeah.
step 1 through 3. And again, like you can actually do, whole theme, right, with light mode, dark mode. It's pretty simple these days. Just remember that I get this question all the time. This is why I'm bringing it up. But some people are like, okay, well, dark mode is my accessible mode, right? This is the only theme that is going to be meeting all of those WCAG rules that we know and love. But unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for our users, is that that's not true. You can't designate one of your themes as accessible and the other one not. So if you have 2 themes, you're responsible for making both of them accessible. So just kind of keep that in mind.
It's definitely interesting seeing the trade-offs too, like light mode and dark mode. Like I've definitely heard the same thing of like, oh, dark mode is the accessible mode, right? But I've also heard of, because folks make the argument that like, oh, dark mode reduces eye strain or something like that. But then I've also met people who have astigmatisms and the light text shows up as very blurry and has like a bit of a halo in like in a dark mode. And so that is inaccessible for them. And so, yeah, giving people the choice and making sure that all choices work well is important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I really hope that the web and all the things that we're doing digitally, we're going towards that idea of user preference. This is, we're going to do 2 small versions of user preference, which is color and motion, right? Or prefers reduce in our case. But this idea that we're giving our users a choice, maybe they want more choices, right? Maybe that, light color, that teal like upsets them or something, whatever. So they should have another option maybe in the future where they can, insert their style sheets easily or somehow turn off that color, swap it, or whatever it is that they want to do. So I'm hoping that happens. I'm seeing more, and definitely on the operating system. So then you do it once and then you don't have to think about it. So.
All right.
All right. Let's do a simple animation. So have you thought about what kind of animation you would like on this?
Seems like maybe the easiest thing would be changing up the colors in some way, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that would be a pretty easy one for a demo for sure. Let me pop in some keyframe. So since we've already taken the IDs out, or like we changed them and we know what we can identify what things are, we've taken the styles out as well. For something like this, we can do something really easy like keyframes. I can send you a little snippet right
I would
here in
love
our
that.
chat if you want.
I am not a CSS animation expert, and so
No. Cassie Evans actually is a really good person for that. Actually, and there's a couple different articles that are out there. But yeah, Cassie Evans knows everything about SVGs and animation of that. This is a super, super duper easy one. What we're doing is just using these keyframes, and we're saying at 0%. So in an imaginary, we're going to set the number of seconds it's going to take. But at 0%, this is going to be this color. At 10%, this color, right? And break it down however you want. Doesn't even have to be that complex. So I guess then to the rainbow. So it's going to be pretty.
All right.
But go ahead and swap things out if you want. You don't even have to do that.
So I mean, I like it. I'm ready to taste the rainbow, as it were.
All right. So the only other thing that you need to do then is go back to your SVG and decide what's going to be the rainbow.
Let's make it. You know what? Let's do both the B and the M. I think. And so, B, M, and so. Do I? So, what?
And you don't need to do that here. Let's give this for you. One more piece of information is that you want to put the animation on the CSS. I should have said that ahead of time. So if you've already identified it, if you haven't, then that's the place where
Okay.
you would add that class or ID. But since we've already identified it, we'll
You
do
know what?
that.
I'll just paste this in. There we go. Okay, so animation rainbow, 25 seconds, linear, infinite. And I think maybe the dark mode is conflicting with that, perhaps.
No, you have one extra closing there after your.
Oh, I do.
Yes, there you go. Now try it. Let's save it and see.
Okay, so it
It's
turned it
slow. Watch
red.
it.
Oh, it is going.
Yay!
Hey, look at
Wait
that.
for it. Wait for it. I didn't want to jar it too much for people that are watching who may be triggered by motion. That we probably should have said that.
Yeah, I apologize. That's totally on me. Yeah. General motion warning. There is color changing, and there
Yes.
likely will be for the next few minutes.
Yes, there will be. So this would be a place where you could designate, any kind of movement, right? You could maybe have your whole SVG move or swap or on hover, right? On focus, right? There's all kinds of not limitless ideas out there. And this is a very simple one with a few extra lines of code. We've got an animation, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, see, I told you you're going to be a wizard.
Yeah.
Right? So the last part is for our users that we don't want to get sick.
Yeah.
We want to add some additional content to stop or slow down the animation. So let me pop that one over to you. And again, we're using simple CSS and simple commands since this is a pretty simple example and also, we're time sensitive, right? We don't have a lot of time to do all the things, but you can do some pretty advanced things with JavaScript as well and integrate that into your SVG animation. So in this case, we're just going to be using the media query. CSS media query prefers reduce motion and the reduce option.
Okay.
So then you're already there. So it's the same thing that we did with the dark mode. We're just going to give it a alternative animation. So there's a lot of discussion about like what that means, right? And some people, that's essentially, if you want to just stop it, you do animation none.
Okay, let's do. So I think I put that on the M. It seems like so. Then animation none.
Yep.
And then I'll have to like go into my system preferences here and turn on reduce motion, which is under accessibility. Then display, reduce motion, and now there is no animation, and it defaults to the yellow. Interestingly.
Yep, because that's the one you identified. That's the base one before you added the animation. So yeah, I mean, so there's a little bit of discussion on what kind of reduced animation experience you want. There are WCAG guidelines around animation that you could look into, but basically in our case, we have that infinite loop and that's not good for that. We'd want it to loop under 5 seconds. And in this case, the transitions would be super fast because we've designated like 9 or 10 colors. So we would probably want to reduce our colors to make it slower, not just flip, right? Because we're thinking about animation. We're also thinking about, flashing or strobing because we don't want to trigger someone to have a seizure, migraine, vestibular disorder, right? There's a lot to think about. So by default, I tend to just turn off the animation because in my mind, I'm thinking if someone doesn't want animation, they probably just don't want animation. Like they don't want a small amount of animation. They just want it to be off.
So
and maybe they don't. Maybe they want some. Maybe in the future we'll have that option, but
it is called like reduce motion and not no motion for a reason.
Correct.
So yeah. I know some folks like Tatiana Mack have written about the notion of like starting with 0 animation by default and then having folks specifically opt into animation. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, let me see. So that's the opposite of what we did. So everything has an equal and opposite reaction when it comes to these CSS media queries. Give me 1 second to pull up the actual presentation that I have. I'm not sharing my screen, but I want to make sure I tell you the right alternative here. So you could flip it on its head. So take that animation and instead of putting it, almost reverse it, right? So the animation starts at 0. You do have to specify that it is 0. Otherwise, when you add that additional animation later on in your code, it might default to that animation. So let me grab real quick. I'm almost there. So I think when you do demos or when you're doing live streams, it's like it takes forever for my
Yeah.
computer to like chunk along here. Let me go.
Meanwhile, I'll find the Tatiana Mac article
Yeah, do
because it
that.
was excellent.
All right, so here are the values that you could do for prefers reduce motion. So reduce, which is what we did. So we started with animation and then we flipped it to reduce, or in our case, we stopped it. And then the other one is the no preference. So here's the can I use for that one. Actually, can I use for both of them? I think that's really interesting, but because it's like 93% supported or something crazy. Like a lot of places use that or allow that, I should say. Oh, it's 94. Oh, wow. Okay. So I have to update my slide. I had 93. But it has this, so you could do the opposites. So what you're talking about and what Tatiana is talking about in that regard is that the first thing we serve up to a user is no motion. And so regardless if they're putting reduced or not, but if they say they have no preference, so by saying I have no preference, I'm just basically not checking that box of prefers reduced motion.
So saying
kind of a reverse
no
thinking,
preference, and then here we have to say animation none up here, right? And
It
then
should work that way, yeah.
down here we can add that. And then
Yeah, I forget what setting you're on. I think you're on reduced motion right now,
I
right?
think so. Let me
Live demo.
always an adventure. But it seems like it's working.
There it is.
So
Yeah.
it's a way
Perfect.
to like turn it on its head of like if the user's browser specifically supports the idea of saying no preference when it comes to prefers reduced motion, then the user has in some way like opted into animation rather than assuming that they wanted animation and then turning it off. So
Exactly. Yeah, you flipped it on and said, hey, and we did that right on the spot. That was kind of gutsy of you. Like
hey,
you are a SVG wizard officially.
I feel like at some point we need a "you're a wizard, Carie" joke.
I'll let you do the jokes. I'm not funny, but yeah, no, I think this is amazing. So this is pretty much where we are, right? This is it. So we have the alternative information about it. We got some motion, we got some reduced motion. We defaulted, like Ben just did, to no motion. And then we have the light and dark mode. So depending on user preference, you might see different things when they visit your site. And you can animate it like anything. Like I said, there could be more animations or more color changes that you'd want to implement if you had more time. That was quick. We did it.
We did it.
An hour.
We did it.
Virtual high five.
Nice. There we go. Okay, so you know what? I am going to go ahead and turn off the motion. Feels polite to turn that off for now. Okay, so I'm gonna give the chat some time to maybe come up with any questions they've got, or maybe I guess describe any experiences they've had with SVG stuff. But I guess my next question is, if I wanted to learn more, where could I go? Like, how could I take this understanding even further?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people, a lot of great people writing about that. You already mentioned Tatiana. I already mentioned Cassie Evans, really great general SVG resource. I think there's a lady, Michelle, I think Baker. I have to get her name for sure, but she's really great at SVGs. And I'm trying to, I mean, Eric Bailey, I know he's written on prefers reduced motion a lot. So that may be some reference, like, again, just looking at like CSS tricks and snatching and places like that, and just Googling SVG, I'm sure you'll find a lot of good references. There's not a lot of us that talk about the accessible part of it fully, like all from everything from beginning to end. But if you put all the pieces together, it makes sense. You can still have that kind of equivalent experience. And that's why I wanted to do this like kind of walkthrough.
Yeah.
Both today and tonight. So then we could be like, because I hope maybe I demystified it a little bit for you and you feel like you can actually go out there and do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think SVG is one of those things I have avoided touching formally with like a 10-foot pole. Like I've had to do some accessibility work, but like or just SVG work in general. But it's the kind of thing where like I don't know that I could go in and really like confidently say one thing or another. Um, so at my old job, something we had to do for IE quite a bit was
Mhm.
adding a focusable equals false on an SVG because apparently
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, Internet Explorer I think treated SVGs as focusable entities for some reason, so like users could tab to it, and that's almost never the right call. It seems.
No, I mean, it's code. I mean, it makes sense logically when you think of it, but I know it sounds bad. And again, maybe it's because I'm not a front end developer anymore, but I know the IE is kind of going the
Hmm.
way of the dinosaur. We're focusing more on edge these
Yeah.
days, but for additional support, I don't see why not. Why couldn't you throw that one in?
Hmm.
In our case, it doesn't really matter if they focus on it or not. But yeah, in some cases, you wouldn't want that, especially if you had tons of SVGs on your page. That'd
Yeah.
be a nightmare for people like me with carpal tunnel. And it's like, I can only keyboard and tab so much
Hmm.
before I get frustrated with the experience, especially because I'm sighted and I know where I want to go. And if I've got additional tab stops, I'm not a happy user
Yeah.
when it's like 200 tabs in and you're like, okay, I just wanted to get to the footer. Like, are we ever going to get there? Like, most of the time that's like on bigger sites or like shopping sites or something with a lot of
Hmm.
actionable elements. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk a bit about contexts that SVGs can appear in because we've been working with like my logo, right? And you've alluded to
Mhm.
like logos have kind of different requirements than icons that serve some sort of function, right?
Mhm.
So what are some of those different contexts that SVGs could appear in, and how might that have impacted our accessibility considerations today?
Yeah, I mean, the only huge big one I think is that color contrast ratio because again, WCAG guidelines, they always have okay, so for anyone newer to that, it's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There's a set of international standards for accessibility and best practices. And you have levels. And so depending on what level you're choosing, like A or double A, you're going to have different regulations and rules. And again, these are guidelines, I should say, they're not hard and fast, but these are the things that, you need to pay attention to for things like litigation and obviously the end user experience. But this doesn't cover everything. I feel like people think that this is like, I do all these things, I check all these boxes, and everything's magically both accessible and has a good user experience. And sometimes that's not true. Sometimes you have to extend it or think about best practices or, test with users. I mean, that's a novel idea, but so anyway, so they always have things, and then they always have under the success criteria, they always talk about what it is, level, and thing like that, and then they always seem to have like exceptions, and then they'll have a list. So if I'm remembering correctly, the non-text contrast, which should be up there, it's one of the new ones for 2.1, which just changed in 2018, so a newer one. But it should have the exemption, I think, for logos, where it doesn't have to meet that color contrast ratio. But I don't know if I'm misremembering that, so I'd have to look at the guideline
Yeah.
for sure.
I feel
Put
like
me
if
on the
I just
spot.
search for logo, the term required for understanding is used. Um, However, that's not a requirement when the graphic is part of a logo or a brand name, which is
Yeah,
considered essential to the presentation.
yeah. So exactly. So in certain cases, logos are exempt, and so like the text is the same. So if you had the text, if it said like Bin Myers,
Hmm.
that text would also be exempt from that because it's a logo. But
Oh,
right now
interesting.
it's separate, so I'm guessing that's its own like HTML like heading level or something like that.
Yeah. Um, Okay, so this is a question from B1 Mind. So we use the title element, but B1 Mind is asking, I recently had learned that the text element in SVG is SEO friendly, but how is it for accessibility? We can check the matrix. I'll put that in the chat again.
I
Uh,
kind of joke around, but sometimes I do these things so I don't have to remember them. I just write like write an article or I think
yeah,
Stephanie, I've heard Stephanie Eccles say that too. It's like I write these things for myself and make these references for myself, and sometimes they're useful to other people, but it's
yeah.
mostly so I don't forget and have to keep doing that research.
So it looks like you're
Yeah,
using
pattern
it.
six.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please.
No, I'm not going to spoil it. You can tell. You can tell everyone about pattern six
Yeah, so
using the text
pattern
element.
6, and then I also see pattern 9 as a possibility. So pattern 6 is not great. It is not great. And in fact, pattern 9 as well. So visual description here, pattern 6. I'm looking at a red column that indicates just constant failure, like no assistive technology browser combination is supporting the text element. And then for pattern 9, the text element is ignored. So it seems reasonable to suggest that maybe we should avoid the text element for accessibility considerations.
Yeah, I mean, it was an unfortunate finding in the testing that it didn't work as well because, like, the listener, or I don't even know, Twitch person, Twitch person, I don't know what you're calling yourself, but they're correct. There's certain like advantages and from it, things beyond accessibility. So I know one of the things that we talk about too is internationalization and switching, you know, the alt based on what language you're in, right? You're going to hear an English alt when you're
Mm-hmm.
when you're choosing English for your drop down on your language. But if you switched and chose like Spanish, you would also want those alternative texts to change. And so there are certain patterns and certain ARIA label or labeled by that are better than others in those situations. And so I really think about pattern choosing as like
Mm-hmm.
this more holistic kind of concept where you have to know about your users, browser
Yeah.
support, AT support, but also things like performance and these language changes, SEO, right? So
Yeah.
just because we chose number 5 and also ease of use, like number 5 was super easy. We just popped in, a title tag and off we went. Whereas if we would have picked, 7 or 8, we might have had an additional step, right? We might have to have added a description or an ID and then tag it. And so it becomes a really question of like, who's building it and who's using it, and do they
Yeah.
know what they're doing?
And how are you building it? Because, doing like, if you're doing the internationalization, you probably got some more complex behind the scenes stuff to make that work. Stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote something too. So I wrote 2 things this year. That's all I've written because I've been busy at school, but popping that in there. But the concept of good, better, best. And I really think that this is kind of falls into that category in that question. It's like, I can't tell you what the very best is. I can tell you what fails for accessibility purposes in ATs and browsers, but I don't know, within those constraints, you still have to decide like, okay, I'm in my environment, my users, my developers, whoever it is that you're considering, um, I have these choices, right? And throughout that, you're choosing this option. The choice that you have to make might not be the very best choice for accessibility, but you're kind of splitting the difference between
Mm-hmm.
being good for other things like SEO and accessibility. So it's like a little bit of a nebulous concept. It's definitely a little bit more thought, takes a little more thought. But like anything accessibility or anything tech, you didn't know how to do it, and then you practiced it, and then now you know how to do it, right? And
Yeah.
it's like anything. It's just a skill.
Absolutely. I love that framing of good, better, best, because I've definitely encountered that in my own experience where, like, the mantra of the accessibility advocate is it depends, right? And
It's
so a lot of
true.
times it's like, well, we want to roughly approach the direction of better in the way that still applies to our context.
Yeah, and I think a big piece of that sometimes, and coming from CMS world before, we had all these fun JavaScript frameworks, is that we had a lot more restrictions on what we could modify. We usually have this core set of code that we can't modify, plus we're getting modules from all these different developers that aren't even
Hmm.
talking to each other. So I might pick up a module, a core might be inaccessible, right? I put them together and then they're extra inaccessible, right? So you really don't know grab bag wise. So sometimes you're very restricted and you can only choose out of a 3, like we have 15 patterns. Maybe you only had the option of choosing out of 3 because of just your framework, right?
Yes.
And so then you can make the best choice. Thankfully, now we have things, like we've talked about, like React and, the Gatsby's of the world, where we can do 11D, right? We can do a lot more within the code, and we can change a lot more. We have a lot more control.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that is a fantastic place to leave it. Is there anything you want to add to that, Carie?
Just that, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and don't give up. There's accessibility community is so welcoming. So if anyone is interested in learning more, definitely the socials like LinkedIn and Twitter and Discord and places like that. There's also W3C based accessibility Slack channel. And that's actually where I got started. And I got to contact people like gurus all the way down to like very beginners, right? And all these sub channels. So a lot of times your questions already been asked. So I could do let's searching within that. It's almost like its own like intranet or mini database or something for accessibility.
Do you know
And
if
lots of
there's
opinions.
yeah?
Yes.
Do you know if there's a public link to those channels or
There's not, but let me populate one for you.
okay?
But anyone who's in the Slack can invite people. But yeah, we had some spammers a few years back, and so they closed it. But once you're in the Slack, you can invite people. So let me,
Okay.
if I can invite people, I can customize invites, and
Yeah.
I'll copy that link over here.
Are
So
you
it should work for people?
Are you good with me putting this in the Twitch chat?
Sure.
Cool. Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, this one's not connected to me, so it doesn't matter. And like I said, there's plenty of people in there that can introduce you and add you manually with an email address as well. So but hopefully that works. Let me know if it doesn't.
All right.
And just DM me on Twitter, and we can add you as well. So
sounds good. Well, Carie, thank you so much for joining us today. I learned a lot. I had a ton of fun. And chat, I hope you learned a lot as well. Go follow Carie on Twitter at Carie Fisher. The link is in the chat again. And thank you all for joining us today. We'll be back Tuesday. I'm having Austin Krim come on. We're going to be making music using the web audio API. So making music using the browser. Super excited to explore that. I've never done that before. And then the following day, Wednesday, we're going to have Chance Strickland on. We're going to be building ourselves a mini Basecamp clone, it seems, with Remix. Super exciting. That just open source. So I'm looking forward to that. Stick around, folks. We're going to find someone to raid. Thank you again for being here. And Carie, thank you so much.
thank you for the invite.
Bye, y'all.